This video is going to look at the domain and range of a composition of functions. So here we have two functions defined, and we are looking for the domain and range of the composition of f of g. First, we need to remember that f of g can also be written as f of g of x. To look at the domain and range, we're going to look at the domain values of the inside function, which in this case is g of x. We're going to start with the first member of the domain of g, which is 1. Looking here at our graphic, g of 1 is 6 and f of 6 is 1. Since we can go all the way through with that, that means that 1 is in the domain of f of g, and 1 is in the range of f of g. Now we'll go to the next member of the domain of g. g of 2 is 8, and f of 8 is 1. This means that 2 is in the domain of f of g, and 1 is in the range. We do not need to list the 1 again since it's already there. Now we'll go to the next value in the domain of g. g of 6 is 3, but notice there's no 3 in the domain of f, so that means that 6 cannot be in the domain. Since we can't go all the way through with it, we move on to the next value. So now, looking at g of 7 is 3, but again, there's no 3 in the domain of f, so we can ignore the 7 and move on to the last value. g of 8 is 8, and f of 8 is 1. That means that 8 is in the domain of f of g, and 1 is in the range. So that would be our answer for the domain and the range of f of g. We're going to look at two more. Here again we have the graphic. This time they want g of f. So g of f can be written as g of f of x. And again, we're going to look at the domain values for the inside function, which is f of x. So, starting with our first domain value of 2, g of 2 is 7. f of 2 is 7, and g of 7 is 5. Since we can go all the way through, the 2 is in the domain of our composition, and 5 is in the range of our composition. Now we'll go to our next value. f of 4 is 2, and g of 2 is 9. So 4 is in the domain of the composition, 9 is in the range. Now on to the next value. f of 6 is 4, but there's no 4 in the domain of g, so we can ignore the 6. Next value, f of 8 is 1, and g of 1 is 9. That means that 8 is in the domain, and 9 is in the range. And again, since the 9 was already there, we don't need to write it again. And there is our answer for the domain and range of the composition. Last one. So here's our function. Again, we're doing g of f. So remember, we're going to look at the domain of the inside function. So we're looking at the domain of f. So f of 3 is 1, g of 1 is 4. That means that 3 is in the domain of the composition, and 4 is in the range. Moving on to the next value in the domain of f. f of 4 is 6, but there's no 6 in the domain of g, so that means that 4 cannot be in the domain of our composition. Moving on to our next value in the domain. f of 5 is 1, and g of 1 is 4. That means that 5 is in the domain, and 4 is in the range. It's already there. Moving on to our next value, f of 6 is 2, g of 2 is 4. That means that 6 is in the domain and 4 is in the range. Moving on to our last value, f of 9 is 6, but there is no 6 in the domain of G, so we're done. All right, it's your turn. You can do it.